Hello and welcome to From the Wings. I'm Stephanie Freed and I'm so glad that you're here and able to join me for today's conversation. This is a crazy exciting week here at the Bushnell. We have Rent, the 25th anniversary tour that opens tomorrow night and it runs through the weekend. And this is the last time the original production is going to tour like this, and we are here for it. So if you don't already have your tickets, I hope you'll go online and get them today. There are still a few left, so you can visit us at bushnell.org and secure your seats. When I think about Rent, it's really hard to believe that it's been part of our collective memory for 25 years. This piece that was imagined by its writer, Jonathan Larson, loosely based on the opera La Boheme, but that captured the New York City of the 80s and 90s in the shadow of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And, when I think about that, it's one of the amazing things that theater and the arts, full stop, does for us as human beings, capturing a moment in time or a person's experience. I think that's really powerful. Earlier this year, the Bushnell partnered with the Mark Twain House and Museum to provide an opportunity for writers to create short stories under the prompt "in the audience." And that can be interpreted in a bunch of different ways. But again, that idea of capturing a time or an individual's experience and how we think about in the audience. Is it from the audience's perspective? Is it participating, not participating? The prompt invited writers to think about it's something in the past or the future or the present. And this contest, called Page to Stage, included a cash prize and the opportunity to have your short story presented as a staged reading on the Bushnell stage at the time we went out with the contest, which was really exciting stuff. More to come on that, but today we're going to talk with a number of folks involved in this year's contest, including the winning writer, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize Webster Bank, our official presenter of the From the Wings series. We are so grateful to Webster Bank for their loyal and generous support today and always, so thank you, Webster Bank. Now, to wet your whistle, for today's conversation, I'd like to share with you a clip from the staged reading, reimagined in the time of COVID as a filmed reading, which we'll talk more about with my guests, of the winning short story, Munich 1919. Let's roll tape.
There were dozens of such groups afoot in Munich, from Spartacists and anarchists to Freikorps thugs. S let them all come, as long as they paid and didn't wreck anything. Business was business. Whatever the politics. Beer isn't black or red, he told his wife. Verse turns equally left and right. S stood at the bar, topping off a row of Pilsners. There were sounds he liked to listen for as he worked. The clanging bell of the streetcar outside in the Lindenstrasse. The clop of a horse's hoof. The birds that twittered at sunset in the tiny yard out back. The birds sang and sang, oblivious to whether things went well for humans or badly. S envied their heedlessness. Tonight he was listening also for the putt-putt of Joachim, the boy next door on his motorized bicycle. Joachim spent his mornings running newspapers all over town and the rest of the day organizing things. Earlier, S had sent him out to organize some potatoes. It was yet another evil that had come back from the war. The traffic in phantom supplies, the bribes and rumors, and the sudden unexplained absence or presence of things. But S needed potatoes.
Compelling stuff, right? Can you feel the time, the space, the energy of that beer hall? I can't wait to get started with our guests, so let's get to it. To begin our conversation, I'd like to welcome our guest today, Rand Richards Cooper, author of Munich 1919, Mike Schilling, the actor who portrays, as you saw, S, the beer hall owner, and Alex Page Hatley, our Associate Director for Market Engagement here at the Bushnell. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today. How exciting it must be to see this project come to life, from conception to reality. Alex, can you tell me a little bit more about Page to Stage and our collaboration with the Mark Twain House and Museum and how the contest got its start?
Sure. So back in the summer of 2020, we were really looking for new ways to engage with our patrons, since there's nothing on our stages. And we had been surveying them and talking to them online, and a lot of them said that they had really dove into reading and writing during this time. And so we thought, well, how can we engage those people who this is what they're doing to fill their time during the pandemic? So we reached out to the Mark Twain House and Museum. I'm going to back up a second too. Before this, we had been talking with our CEO, David Fay, and we had presented our survey results. And he said, what if we have a like group novel writing and we can all write a chapter of a novel? And so that was the starting point. And we thought, how can we make this a little, like, scale it down slightly so it's a little bit more manageable? And so we contacted the Mark Twain House and Museum, who have lots of experience with contests like this, and they kind of helped us get the idea together and help us organize all the rules and how we should structure it, and we went from there. It was wonderful.
And in thinking about the contest, obviously it has to be adjudicated. It's a contest. Yep. How did we handle
that? Sorry, could you explain the question a little bit?
So who judged our contest?
Got it. Sorry. So we, since it was the first year, we really wanted to make sure we could attract some attention with a judge who people would recognize. And we were so grateful that Ransom Riggs, author of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, decided to join us as the judge of the contest. And he was wonderful to work with and so accommodating. And he was ultimately given the final 5 submissions, and he ranked them from there.
And did he know who the writers were? How did that work?
Everything was anonymized, so nobody knew who the writers were. In the entire judging process, they were all the names were stripped at the very beginning, and we kind of had this several rounds of judging to kind of float up the top contestants.
Up to Ransom, and then he made the ultimate decision.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I look forward, Rand, to talking with you about how it was when you ultimately got to talk with Ransom. But before we get there, I know if I was watching this at home, I would want to know, how can I see the whole thing? When is that going to happen and where?
So our premiere of the entire Munich 1919 video will happen next Thursday, November 11th at 6 p.m. Rand will be joined by David Fay from the Bushnell and Peter Roos from the Mark Twain House and Museum. They'll have a conversation, and we'll premiere it live on Facebook and YouTube. So those links will be out later today.
Okay, that's exciting. All right, so next Thursday, a week from today. Awesome. All right, so Rand, tell us a little bit about Munich 1919. What's the story? How did the prompt inspire you? And then, like I said, I'm really curious to know how it went when you actually got to talk with Ransom.
So in Munich, in the fall of 1919, Hitler, who was then an unknown 30-something-year-old ex-army corporal, veteran of World War I, attended several beer hall gatherings that were sponsored by a group that later became the Nazi Party. I read about this in a terrific biography by Charles Flood called Hitler, The Path to Power, which I'd highly recommend. It's about Hitler's early years. And I was struck by Flood's account of a meeting that happened in September 1919, actually September 12th. I remember that because my mother was born about 10 years later on that day, when Hitler denounced a fellow audience member, and he did it so vehemently and so passionately that the other guy left, as Hitler later boasted in Mein Kampf. He said he skulked away like a wet poodle. And the handful of people who were there, these kind of feckless proto-Nazis, were very impressed by the power of Hitler's oratory, and quite soon he became kind of their chief demagogue. Now, I was curious about what might it have been like actually to have been there in the Sternecker Bräukeller, the Sternecker brewery, on what we could consider the foundational moment of German fascism. Now, for me, I lived in Germany for 6 or 7 years. The story is partly about my love of Germany, the German language, and I loved how Mike, performing the bar owner, did the German stuff. It's not easy to do. You have to go back and forth between narrative and speaking voices. For me, the challenge of writing this piece, and I'll tell you how the prompt helped, was that I really had never written historical fiction, and I was interested in doing that. You know, there's a way in which history from our retrospect seems like inevitable because, you know, it happened. But the task of all historical writing is to undo that sense of inevitability and put us there amid actual life, even if it's 100 years ago, as events are unfolding and all possible outcomes are still in play.
Yeah.
We tend to think about German fascism as having been overwhelmingly powerful and inevitable, but at the beginning, like in Munich in 1919, this was a handful, ragtag bunch of misfits, and I wanted to capture something of that. Now, the prompt was perfect. I had been working on this story for years. I had done prior iterations of it, was never completely satisfied, but the prompt asked us to imagine someone being in an audience at an event where, quote from your prompt, the choice is to participate or to observe. The character Mike plays, the bar owner, is a classic observer. He's apolitical, he's sarcastic. All he wants to do is make money by serving food to these guys. At the same time, he's dealing with terrible duress and privation. And part of Munich in 1919 was runaway inflation, lack of food, and economic desperation. The thesis of the piece, it's a historical theme, is that when you put economic privation and duress together with powerful populist demagoguery, it becomes very combustible. The guy played by Mike at the end essentially goes from being an observer to being a participant. He steps out from behind the bar. Hitler ends with this burning oratory by Hitler, which we can talk about how that's done in the stage version. It's just great. But so the prompt really galvanized this draft of this story, because that decision to join in what becomes a terrible movement is the pivotal moment of this story.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said, you know, thinking about, you're right. Like when we look back historically, it feels predetermined, but it wasn't predetermined. There's a moment in time, many of them, where it can go lots of different ways. And I mean, there's power in that, thinking about today, right? That the future is not predetermined, that we have choices, and what are those choices? And I don't know that there was intention in this, but I see parallels, right, in the story and, you know, current political situations. And I found that particularly interesting.
Yeah, I think you know, one of those parallels is that in Munich in 1919, which was highly partisan, and partisan groups basically hated each other. There was really no discourse among extremes. Each political group sort of had its armed thugs who were fighting it out in the streets. So it's a nightmarish version of what happens when the ability to have political discourse breaks down, and when you add in like near starvation, economic disaster, you know, again, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's really, it's a lot to think about, like as I'm thinking about just that idea of the predetermination or not, and the parallels. So in the presentation, and you just mentioned this, Rand, the way the story was presented in this staged reading, Alex, I know that initially the intention was this was going to be a live stage reading, but with COVID and as things progressed and the Delta variant, we had to kind of reimagine that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it evolved, and how, as Rand was talking about, we presented some of the pieces of this in the film version?
Sure. So there was a few different things that we had thought about when doing this. First, we knew we wanted to have it on the Bushnell stage because it was going to be a staged reading. But as we thought about how we might present this in a non-live way, we turned to video and thinking about the setting, this beer hall and all these sounds in the environment of a beer hall. We kind of thought, let's do this as a radio drama. And so that kind of idea evolved to really focus on the sounds and the story. And we ended up, kind of putting all those elements together. And we found a wonderful Foley artist in Tate Burmeister who did a great job. And you can see her in the behind Mike in the reading there with her stage full of sound props.
So, and when we thought about, so we cast the Foley artist. When we thought about casting for the role of S, the beer hall owner, can you tell me about that process?
Sure. So we put out a casting call on Backstage. We wanted somebody who, could speak in a German accent or maybe even had a little experience speaking German, who kind of would give us this a little bit of an imposing kind of figure. And we ended up finding the perfect person in Mike here.
Well, and perfect indeed. And Mike, it's so great to have you here. And I'm so glad that you were part of this piece. When I think, and we had some conversation before we went live today about the connections Mike might have, but I'd love for you to share with our viewers now what brought you to the piece, what compelled you about it, and what connections you have.
Well, so I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. My wife and I own a shop in town here called Beerology, and it works pretty well. And it's upscale homebrew shop and education center. We do kind of beer, wine, cider, mead. I actually went to brewing school in both Chicago and in Munich, so I had some experience with that. My grandmother is from Germany, and so I learned a little German from her growing up. I took a little bit of German in school, and then I was there for brewing school.
How, reading the story when you first read it and then came in for rehearsals, how did you connect with the material? Obviously it's not 1919, it's 2021. But what drew you into the piece?
A couple things. One, I looked up the Steinecker Bräukeller, which is the location, and it's not apparently in existence the way it was, but I had walked right by it, going to other places, other beer halls, for example. Okay. I don't know much about it, but I looked it up and found pictures and stuff. I'm like, I feel like I went right by there, and I don't know what's there, what. So just literally having been in that very place, it's a very different place, and I love the feeling of a grand hall. I mean, the location of being in a theater made a lot of sense. These are often very large, cavernous halls. The clinking glasses are so perfect. Mm-hmm. To be able to capture that atmosphere this way was fascinating. But then, subject matter wise, I'm interested in this time period, of course. I think one of the big challenges when approaching the text was, how do I do some of these voices in such a way that it's serious? I mean, so often if you look on Google for angry Hitler or something, it's all just a joke. All the things you find are 999, all these ridiculous South Park characters seeming portrayals of Hitler, and to approach it not as a stooge, but rather a serious thing that happened. I think that was, I knew that was going to be a challenge. The other thing I was kind of interested in, don't use real German accents on certain words that are too far from English. That's another thing that really struck me, that I had to work on a lot. Certain words make sense in context, but other ones, Americans may not get München. So I can't be am I the turnip king of München? But I said Munich, so that it still works in context, for example. So I just immediately I saw all the things I'd need to work on, and it was kind of a fun puzzle piecing everything together.
How was it to, and I wasn't part of the filming, Alex, and as she said, I think she said Ryan Glista, also on the Bushnell team, were playing those roles in creating the piece. How was it to have the sound effects happening behind you? You can't see them. You're speaking and you hear it. What was that experience like?
It was interesting. In rehearsals, we would often change where the sound came in, or I would change my tempo or something at a different time, and that would change how she had to react. So we kind of had to, she really had to listen to where I was, because I would kind of change things up sometimes. So I think she had the tough job. I just kind of went along, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in a beer hall, and stuff's going on. I can't get too distracted. I got to really focus on what I'm saying. But I felt like that also is the character. He'd be trying to do things, but also trying to focus. So it put me in the right headspace, I think.
Yeah, and you can really see her listening in the filming. But Rand, were you saying something?
Well, I just wanted to praise Mike and draw on something that he said. The fact that Hitler's oratory is so ripe for parody, as in that film Downfall, which is what you alluded to, became a huge meme where people would pipe in all this ranting stuff into Hitler's ranting monologues. The flip side of that was that, especially earlier on, before he became pathologically insane in a clinical sense, his oratory also had a mesmerizing quality, and you caught that well, and I thought the whole production did it well. One of the challenges for me was to show how this unknown person in the middle of this situation of emergency and duress had a way of speaking. In Mein Kampf, Hitler said his first discovery about himself that started his career was, I could speak, I could talk. And his ability to seduce crowds was legendary. And the way you guys do it in the production, when finally Hitler gets to speak at the end, and again, he's never named in the story. He's just this kind of anonymous figure who comes in. And Mike, you're doing this oratory that's full of the word German this and German that, this sort of over-the-top nationalism. You guys then we cut away from you to a shadow, and we see this shadowy figure of the hands. Hitler had certain gestures that he would make, and they're described in the story as holding an invisible goblet. And so for us to see not you directly doing anything, but this black shadow heightens the sort of sinisterness, but also the seductiveness of it. And I thought that was a brilliant set of decisions that you guys made to bring that part of the story out.
Well, and my next question was going to be to you, Rand, and that was to see your original piece presented in this way, and you've kind of captured this, but overall, what did you think about the staging and the performances of Tate and Mike, in enlivening what had been previously in your mind?
So always when you write something, especially if you're not writing it for the stage, you're writing it for the page, narrative works differently, and things need to be edited out because of pacing, and also points of emphasis are not necessarily always the way you hear it in your mind. So there's an interesting creative tension between the interpretation that actors give and the interpretation in your mind. I would say at certain moments, Mike played it a little like the critical moment of the story is when S goes back into the kitchen and he sent the boy out to get potatoes, and the boy comes back and S has been fantasizing that maybe he brings something else from the black market, maybe a radio or something. Not only does he not have anything else for S, but the potatoes turn out to be turnips. And in writing that, I wanted to show that, and that is like the breaking moment for him. Things are so bad that you can't even get potatoes. And for a German, if you don't have the potatoes, it's really, really bad. And in that moment, it kind of breaks. And Mike and doing the wife who has lines and doing S played it more interestingly, slightly more low key than I had it in my mind. So I sort of profited from the ability to kind of hear it a little bit differently, and that's always interesting. But the other thing I would say about the decision to have the Foley artist in the background doing all that stuff with this random eclectic assortment of noisemakers. I love that, because one of the underlying themes of the story is the theme of deprivation. People are having to improvise. They're having to make lives out of stuff at hand, and there's not enough stuff. And so there was an indirect way in which the creative use of all these funny noise-making devices in ways you wouldn't expect, like taking a football and rolling over something to make a sound of the motorcycle pulling up in the gravel. It was as if it brought out that theme of sort of forced improvisation, and that was another reason to like it. I found it visually quite alluring, and I love to see my mere words, given visual life that way. It's really gratifying.
Terrific. Alex, this is not a question that I said I would ask you in advance, but thinking about Rand watching this, and then thinking about the original version I saw was in color, and I know we ended in a black and white version. Why did we make that choice?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it really adds to the drama of the whole piece, and I think it feels more period appropriate too, a little bit. And I also have to say that we, while we have the Foley artist, we also had a sound engineer who piped in some of the crowd noises, and I think that really ramps up the tension and the drama of the piece as well. And I want to give a big shout out to Bill Ahern at Tapeworks for that. He did an amazing job. So I think just the choice to go to black and white was really for the drama and the period appropriateness of the piece.
While we're giving shout outs, I want to be sure that we mention Sarah Stevenson,
Yes.
Also on our team, who really helped bring Page to Stage, the contest, to fruition. So she couldn't be with us. She is away this week, but I do want to give a call out there. So I'm really looking forward. As I said, I've seen it, but I look forward to seeing it again. And just as a reminder to those watching, it will broadcast at 6 p.m. next Thursday, November 11th. The links to watch it will go out on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be sharing it in our Friday curtain call email, as well as on our social channels. But again, that's next Thursday at 6 p.m. And I want to thank everyone. I could spend another hour talking to you all about this, but thank you, Mike and Rand, for being part of this and bringing your unique talents to the contest. I hope that you enjoyed the process as much as we enjoyed doing it.
Totally.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mike, let's have a beer sometime.
I would love that.
You could head up to Northampton, stop at Beerology.
I won't bring any fascists with me, though.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's conversation, just a reminder, the Bushnell depends on the support of our donors and sponsors to do projects like Page to Stage and to help fulfill our mission of elevating the spirit of our community. We are especially grateful to our sponsor, Webster Bank, for their continued commitment to our From the Wings series. And it is also your support through individual giving, whether it's your gift to the annual fund, subscription purchases, ticket purchases, all that you do to help sustain us. You did that, and you ensured that we were here and ready to welcome you back now that the time is right. I hope you'll consider renewing your gift, or perhaps making your very first gift in support of that work today by visiting us at bushnell.org/donate now. And as always, as a reminder, if you haven't already, sign up for our e-club at bushnell.org/e-club. That makes sure you get announcements about cool contests like Page to Stage, or that you're getting our Friday curtain call emails that give you information to connect to the performances and videos and all the things that are happening both in the community and here at the Bushnell. And of course, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all the usual places. I also hope that you'll join us for our next episode of From the Wings on Thursday, November 18th. We'll share our topic on social media leading up to that. Until then, thank you for watching and take good care.